Hi, everyone. Welcome to this introduction episode of the Learn Psychotherapy podcast, and thank you for listening. I'm going to tell you all about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what you need to know. There's already a lot of great content available about therapy. You can find videos of actual sessions, role plays, and more books and theory videos than you could consume in a lifetime. But this is the first podcast and video series designed to not only demonstrate the most foundational skills of psychotherapy, but also to give you the chance to practice along to develop your abilities. And all of this is based on a book series called The Essentials of Deliberate Practice, which is published by the APA, the American Psychological Association. Okay, so you might be wondering, is this podcast for me? And regardless of whether or not you work in the field of mental health, the answer is yes. These episodes are for anybody who wants to get better at the skills that make you a good therapist. So whether you're a licensed professional, a student, maybe you're interested in becoming a therapist, or just interested in learning about these techniques for other personal or professional reasons, we're happy to have you here. So, what are we doing on the Learn Psychotherapy podcast? We're taking the major themes and modalities of therapy, identifying the most important skills, and breaking down those skills into their component parts. Then we repeat those skills until you can do them well. This is about practice, not passive learning. That's what makes this podcast unique. When you memorize something, you're borrowing it. When you practice it enough until it becomes second nature, it's truly yours. So when a client says something like,
I get panic attacks. I know it's not realistic to get rid of them right away, but I'd really like for them to happen less.
You feel comfortable responding in a way that fits the client's needs and feels authentic to you. If you've ever listened to an experiential language learning podcast, you'll recognize this format. There's no expectation for perfection. You're going to make mistakes, and that's actually part of the learning process. We welcome it. As long as you're challenging yourself to embrace those mistakes as you go, you'll be on the right track to learning psychotherapy. So, on this podcast, we release episodes in seasons that focus on a specific theory, concept, or model of therapy. Each season begins with an expert interview to help you understand the subject material better. And that's kind of the more traditional way to learn about therapy. But then we practice. There are 4 to 6 more episodes per season, each one focusing on a specific skill. And in these episodes, you'll hear a description of the skill, the criteria required to meet that skill, and an example. Then there's a demonstration where a volunteer for each season will try the skills, followed by a practice section for listeners who want to jump right into trying it themselves. And here's how you can make the best use of this podcast. If you simply want to see or hear these skills in action, the demo sections are right for you. If you want to observe the skills and try them yourself, check out the demo section and pause the episode after each client statement to see how well you can meet the skill criteria. And if you're here for the practice, the section at the end of each episode has 15 client statements. Pause the episode after each one, improvise a response that meets the skill criteria and feels authentic to you, and then keep going to hear a sample response that we've provided. As I mentioned earlier, if you're practicing along, you'll be making some mistakes. And on this podcast, that's actually a good thing, because this stuff is surprisingly difficult. Every skill on this podcast has been tested with volunteers who range from first-year grad students to PhD-level therapists. Not a single skill has been easy for everyone, and some exercises have had to be reworked because they were simply too difficult. Therapy is a beautiful thing, but it can be very hard, so we encourage you to practice along and to remember that anything that feels difficult is just another area where you can work hard to develop your skills to become a more effective therapist. Or if you're not a therapist, just to get better at these important ways of communicating. Now, when we talk about this approach to learning how to do therapy, there are some common questions that come up, and I'll answer some of them here. You may be wondering, is this all I need to do? It can't be that simple, right? And of course, yes, this is just one part of a bigger puzzle. It's important to learn theory, practice with role plays, get supervision, and of course, work directly with clients. But this way to learn specific skills, it's called deliberate practice, is a crucial component to the end goal of therapeutic mastery. Another thought that may come up as you start practicing these skills is around the sample responses we're providing. We'll demonstrate what good therapy looks like, but there are really an infinite number of ways that these skills can be done well. So much of what makes therapy successful is specific to the individual client, the therapist, each person's cultural background, and so much more. We're not telling you what to do. We're showing you how to practice so that you can be as effective as possible. And one last common question about using deliberate practice is related to the fact that therapy is such a dynamic process. that if we deconstruct it into individual skills, won't that be a bit too rigid or robotic? And this is a very important concern. So what we're doing is separating the practice of therapy from the performance of therapy. If you learn how to do something, anything really, by practicing specific techniques until they become second nature, you can take that knowledge with you and implement it in a way that feels both highly skilled and organic. That's why we're not doing traditional role plays, lectures, or anything like that. The focus here is on practicing skills in lots of different ways so you can learn them, take them with you, and use them as you see fit in your personal or professional life. To wrap up this introduction, let me tell you a bit about myself and Sentio University. I'm a therapist in California. I also co-host the Very Bad Therapy podcast, and I'm an expert in deliberate practice. Since 2020, I've been working with leading authors, researchers, and professors in the areas of psychotherapy and deliberate practice to create a brand new university and training clinic. Now, to be clear, I am absolutely not an expert in every single skill that we'll be covering on this podcast. Nobody is. And that's the beauty of this method of learning. We've got skill criteria written by experts, many from the APA book series I mentioned earlier, for every episode to help you learn these techniques. And I'll be here to guide you, the listeners, and the volunteer for each season through the deliberate practice. If you like what we're doing on this podcast, check out Sentio University. We're building a new nonprofit graduate institution from scratch, a standalone master's level marriage and family therapist program to start that incorporates the principles of deliberate practice into every class. We want our students and trainees to get hundreds of hours practicing these crucial skills with hands-on mentorship from their professors so that we graduate effective therapists who are prepared to go into the field and make a difference in their local communities. You can learn more about Sentio University at sentio.org, and that's also where you'll find more info about this podcast, more free resources for learning psychotherapy, and accompanying PDFs for each episode. Let's get started.